Introducing LT Defense Tactical Gear, your ultimate solution for top-notch protection and performance in the field. Our armor bundles provide unmatched safety and comfort, while our battle belts and holsters ensure quick and easy access to your gear. Stay prepared for any situation with our high-quality medical supplies, designed to keep you ready for action at all times. Looking to enhance your skills? Our firearms training programs will take your proficiency to the next level. Trust LT Defense for all your tactical gear needs and gear up for success on the battlefield.
Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Think of all that time. Every wait in the winter. All those hours no one else. Think of all that time. Think of every sacrifice in the summer. Every wait in the mornings on the levee. Late nights in the film room. Bus rides to playoff games. Every bump in the road. Every moment of ecstasy. Every moment of doubt. Years wondering. Is it all worth it? It's all led to this. Man, I got this. It's a 60-minute drive for a 60-minute game. After all the miles we've traveled, we're almost there. After all the hours we've worked, one more can make us legends. After all that time, this is our time.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Good knowing exactly where to go with the football.
All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, who helps give veterans a voice, who helps teach veterans how to podcast, and most importantly, lets veterans' voices be heard. So we are back post-Super Bowl, and unfortunately, much to my chagrin, the Kansas City Chiefs did not three-peat, and no, it is not because I'm a Chiefs fan. I am the farthest thing from it. However, I was not a fan of Nick Sirianni being able to have any type of happiness and being able to win a Super Bowl by any stretch of the imagination. Mike asked a great question, and we'll throw it in there as we break into the Super Bowl. But Mike asked if Rashid Rice had played, do you think it would have been a different outcome? So we'll break that down as we go into the Super Bowl. We'll talk about what went wrong for the Chiefs, how Philly just absolutely dominated on every side of the ball. We'll talk about what's next for both teams. I've been looking at the salary cap situation for both teams, and like all the websites have different salary cap reporting, which is a little suspect to me, just personally. And then we'll talk about, of course, the quote unquote breaking news, but something that was already pretty well known prior to the Super Bowl for a lot of pretty diehard sports fans that dive into a lot of the rumors and whatnot. But Kellen Moore, also hired as the Saints head coach, the former offensive coordinator for both the Cowboys, the Chargers, and the now Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. So let's dive into what happened with the Super Bowl, what happened with Kansas City and whatnot. Overall, this was just an ugly game. At one point, it was 34-0. Philly just absolutely came out and dominated. I appreciate that, Mike. And Patrick Mahomes just did not look like the Patrick Mahomes of old that we're used to seeing. This was a game that we hadn't seen since that Tampa Bay game where the Buccaneers just absolutely dominated Patrick Mahomes. The offensive line was an absolute mess. Kansas City couldn't get anything going as far as the run game goes. Patrick Mahomes was the leading rusher with 25 yards on 4 carries. Kareem Hunt didn't do anything. Samaje Perine didn't do anything. Isaiah Pacheco didn't do anything. Philly's run defense absolutely stifled them in every single thing that they do. Now, on the other hand, believe it or not, Kansas City actually stifled and shut down Saquon Barkley extremely well. Now, they couldn't stop Jalen Hurts, and it's interesting because you look at how they do against Baltimore. I mean, Kansas City has almost always beaten Baltimore here lately, whether it's the regular season, whether it's the postseason. And even whenever they face the Buffalo Bills, they're able to shut down, Josh Allen's ability as far as running the ball. They're able to shut down Lamar's ability to be able to run the ball. And for whatever reason, they weren't able to do or replicate the same with Jalen. And I'm not sure if that's just a matter of they were focused so hard on stopping Saquon that they just kind of let Jalen do whatever he wants to do, and they kind of dared Jalen to throw it. Which I get a lot of people had even mentioned in the media that they didn't believe that Jalen Hurts was a great thrower. They even talked about this when they drafted him early on. They drafted him in the second round, and he was sitting behind Wentz, and a lot of people thought, okay, he's never going to be a starting quarterback, purely because they didn't like the way that he threw the ball, and they didn't think that he was a caliber starter. I watched Jalen both at Alabama and even at Oklahoma both, and I thought, okay, that's not necessarily true for Jalen. Jalen is a fantastic thrower of the ball. He just has to be put in the right situation. He has to have the right pieces put around him. So that was kind of an insult to Jalen. And then obviously the year that he took them to the Super Bowl against the Chiefs and the Chiefs won it, he was one of the best prolific passers in the league under Shane Steichen's offense. So I really don't get where they came up with that narrative. Now, obviously, he had a little bit of a slump once Shane Steichen left. Now, Kellen Moore comes in, and this is what I think is funny, is when Kellen Moore was with the Cowboys had almost always a top 10 passing offense with Dak Prescott at the helm. And, they have Amari Cooper, they have CeeDee Lamb, they have Michael Gallup, they have Dalton Schultz. That's when Zeke wasn't exactly prime Zeke, but he was serviceable and was able to do what they needed him to do. They had a pretty decent offensive line to boot with that and whatnot. So, I mean, realistically, he knows how to get his quarterbacks to be able to throw the ball. That's never been an issue. With Dallas, it was always they would abandon the run game extremely quickly. And then, funny enough, he goes to Philly. He gets a running back in Saquon Barkley and has, as far as passing weapons go, you've got Jalen Hurts, who's an extremely good quarterback. You've got A.J. Brown. You've got Devontae Smith. You've got Dallas Goedert. They went and got Jahan Dotson from Washington, who I didn't necessarily think he was a bad pickup. But if I remember correctly, Washington spent a first-round pick on him, and I really didn't understand why. I didn't feel that he was a true first-round talent just because, again, to an extent, you kind of have to show me that you're miles ahead of everybody in college football-wise for me to say, yeah, you're a first-round talent type of pick. And Jahan, that his entire time at Penn State, I never really saw that from him. So I kind of get why Washington traded him to Philly, just added continued depth for the Eagles offense nonetheless. So overall, Philly had a ton of weapons on offense, and the fact that they were, I think I saw a report, they were either 28th or 29th in passing offense, but they were second in rushing all year, mainly behind Saquon Barkley and obviously Jalen Hurts both. So for the fact that Kellen Moore completely flipped it from being a pocket passing offensive coordinator with Dak Prescott to now a more run heavy because of just the talented running back that is Saquon Barkley was really surprising. And then obviously that defense has been stout for an extremely long time. Now, last year, there was a little bit of question marks, and I think that was more of the defensive coordinator than anything. They bring in one of the best as far as Vic Fangio is concerned, and he's able to turn that defense into something absolutely prolific. Now, there was a thought that was mentioned from, I believe, Nick Wright. I know a lot of people aren't Nick Wright fans if you watch a lot of sports shows. One, because he's a Chiefs fan and he can be kind of an annoyance, but I will say he did take it very well on the chin yesterday because they gave him a ton of grief about the Chiefs losing. He brought up a good point. When you look at that Philadelphia defensive line, none of it is really bad as far as the players aren't good. But if you look, Jalen Carter is on a completely different level as far as being great goes. And it was one that when you looked at the draft, when he was coming out of Georgia, it was a high risk, high reward. He had a lot of trouble. He was getting into a lot of issues. And I even know Mike Hughes, who has watched the show and is potentially even watching the show now, he and I kind of talked about it. If he could get into the right, stable environment, he would be fine. And I will say, he went to Philly, and I was like, okay, I have a little bit of hesitations because Philly is really bad about they're kind of wild child. You can pretty much do just about whatever you want to do. But Philly does have a lot of very respectable veterans. You had Jason Kelsey there. You have Lane Johnson on the defensive line. You had Brandon Graham. You got CJ Gardner-Johnson. So there's a lot of people there to not only be able to help guide him and lead him, but he had a ton of other Georgia Bulldogs come along with him. He had Jordan Davis, who was drafted just a year before, who to me, Jordan Davis at one point, if anybody remembers and if anybody watches Georgia football that deeply, he was that guy. He and Jalen Carter, both when they were at Georgia, was like a super stout defensive line. Jordan Davis was highly touted. And I'm not going to say he's fallen off, but he's not at that level that Jalen has been able to get up to on that defensive line side. So the defensive line is good. You had Jalen Carter there overall being able to really kind of highlight it. Linebackers wise, as far as Sweat, as far as Bond goes, they're fantastic. And then the big thing that has always hurt the Eagles for years has been their secondary, and their secondary stayed healthy almost all year. Again, adding CJ Gardner-Johnson again this past offseason, having Darius Slay and whatnot was a tremendous help for them to really be able to solidify their chance of being able to win the Super Bowl. For Kansas City's side, they still have to work on the offensive line. And I think the fact that now they're going to have to retool, they're going to have to readapt, and that wide receiver room still needs a lot of work. I know Xavier Worthy is there. He has an extremely bright future. He was great at Texas. He had a pretty good stat wise for the Super Bowl. He had over 125 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, albeit they were in garbage time when it didn't really matter anymore. He still had them nonetheless. Obviously, they got DeAndre Hopkins midseason, which is good for experience, but overall, though, I don't really see that being a needle mover goes. And Mike mentioned the question earlier, if Rashee Rice had played, do you think the outcome would have been different? I don't necessarily think so, and I say that because if we look at what the Chiefs have been able to do realistically all year, now not saying again that the refs didn't play a factor and whatnot, it's really not like Kansas City's offense was stagnant. Now, they weren't as colorful and flashy as we've seen the Chiefs offense have been before with Tyreek Hill, with Kelsey more in his prime, and all the other different weapons that they've been able to use before. So they definitely had to retool. They got a little bit older, and they also have a little bit of kind of younger inexperience and some guys that are honestly more injury prone. But to me, I think honestly the biggest neutralizing factor is the fact that Travis Kelce is 35 years old. He's kind of coming to the end of his career. Now, I know a lot of people asked if this is going to potentially be his last career, and he didn't really want to comment on it. And I get that. It's an emotional night after losing the Super Bowl. I don't think he'll be back. If he does, I'll be kind of surprised. It might be one of those he just kind of continues to ride at least until they win another Super Bowl, which is very possible next year. Depending on what they're able to do in the offseason, depending on what they're able to do in the draft and whatnot. But I don't necessarily see him staying because, to be honest with you, You've won 3 Super Bowls. You've been to 5. You and Patrick Mahomes have an extremely great chemistry and bond. You've done a ton as far as the regular season statistics and accolades go. You've done the same thing as far as the postseason accolades go. There's really not much more Travis Kelce has to do. He's already all but solidified the fact that he's more than likely going to go into the Hall of Fame in the future. So it will be interesting to see what he does for the future and whatnot, and how it ends up shaping up for the Chiefs. But we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll get into that. We'll get into that a little bit deeper. As far as what the salary cap situation looks like kind of for both teams. I'll even see if I can find the key free agents that each team is going to lose and whatnot. I know Philly has a ton that they're going to lose, and we will go from there. So when we come back,
tune in to Clado's Cacophony of Sound every Saturday night from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern on Military Broadcast Radio at mbradio.us or on Twitch at DJ_Clado. MBR, giving veterans a voice.
She ain't mine, but she looks fine. Gonna take some time, gonna make her mine, gonna make her mine.
All right, welcome back in, everyone, to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, helping teach veterans how to podcast, and most importantly, letting veterans' voices be heard. So we are back to talk a little bit more about the Super Bowl and whatnot. I already kind of went over what I think went wrong, what I think went really well for both teams as far as positions and whatnot. What I think happened for both. The interesting thing that we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens is both teams are fairly cash strapped as far as the salary cap goes. And if you look at one website, this is overthecap.com. They have actually both of them about tied with each other as far as their overall position. Now it has the Chiefs are actually $2 million over the cap. And this one has Philly. They have about $14 million to work through. And then on spottrack.com, it actually has Kansas City. Yeah, Kansas City is about 2 spots below them, says they have about almost $16 million to work with. And Philly supposedly almost has $24.5 million. But funny enough, on ESPN this morning, it had Philly only has about $3 million in cap space, 3.7, almost $4 million in cap space to work with. So I don't really know which one to believe on that. I feel like I would say probably about $10 million each, because I'm just going to do a roundabout guess median of what each team has as far as space goes. Both teams are going to have a lot of moves that they're going to have that are going to happen for both teams, and it'll be interesting to see how these GMs do with that. Now, I will say with Howie Roseman, and I've made this joke many times before, I think he does some type of dark magic or something to be able to get some of the trades, be able to get some of the signings and whatnot that he's able to do for both teams. I will say for both of these teams having been in the Super Bowl, Kansas City having a little bit more of the longevity success as far as winning Super Bowls go, they're both in very, very positive positions for both teams, because if you're looking to join the Kansas City Chiefs and you're looking for the fact of, I want to at least be able to compete for a ring, you're going to go to a great organization that's going to be able to do that. You've got a solid quarterback. You've got a solid head coach. They've got solid pieces around them. And if you go there, even if it's on the veteran minimum, that you're more than likely going to be competing for that Super Bowl come January, February timeframe. And even the same for Philadelphia. Philly historically, and even over the last few years, they have been really good as far as Howie Roseman goes, of being able to negotiate, being able to free up a lot more money to keep guys there, and to be able to, have guys take a little bit of pay cuts in order to, again, the same thing. They're going to be there as far as January and February goes, and competing for competing for the big title on the big stage. So for both of these teams, they're in a decent position as far as that goes. Now, for some of them, I know for Philly, Brandon Graham already announced he's going to retire. I know for the last couple of years, I've kind of wondered the same thing about Lane Johnson, the right tackle. absolutely one of the best whenever he's healthy. He's had a little bit on and off the field issues, just being able to stay healthy mostly. Obviously, they paid a ton for Saquon. They paid a ton for Jalen. They paid A.J. Brown. They already paid Devontae. So they got ahead as far as a lot of these go. And some of it you can kind of push the money down a little bit in the future to try to clear and clean a lot of stuff up. But again, some of these guys are going to want the bank, and so some of them are going to leave. That's something that Kansas City has had to deal with, something that Philly's also probably going to deal with. So I mean, both, again, cash wise, they're going to be a little bit strapped. At least for the Chiefs, the benefit is they only have, according to this, according to both, they mirror each other actually pretty similarly in this regard. They only have about, a little over $200K in dead money. Now Philly has 29 million in dead money. So KC has a little bit in that advantage of when they do move off, they move off completely. Philly, they still have a little bit of residual contracts and whatnot that they still have to deal with and that they have to manage and go through. But again, I don't doubt that Howie Roseman's going to be able to do that and be able to get that knocked out. At least on the Philadelphia side. Now Kansas City, again, it's going to be interesting. Obviously they're big players that they're paying wise. Patrick Mahomes counts for over 66 million just in the cap hit for KC. Same with Chris Jones. So I mean, those are two of their biggest right there. Now at least the benefit, even if Travis Kelce retires, they're not going to take a big cap hit. If he does. Now, if they do, if it's a cut pre-June 1st, they're going to have about $2 million in dead money. And if it's post-June 1st, they're still only going to have about $2.5 million. They're actually going to save almost $17 million if they were to potentially cut Travis Kelce, or if he was to retire or whatever he decides to do. So KC's in a pretty decent spot as far as that goes. Now, as far as Philly goes, who's taking up the most? So Jalen Hurts is definitely taking up the most. He is 42 million guaranteed. Obviously, they're not going to cut him. AJ Brown is right there with them. So this is actually kind of interesting as far as Lane Johnson. I didn't know he was the third highest paid guy on there. So he is actually hitting about $17 million against the cap. If they cut him pre-June 1st, it's going to be $33 million in dead money, and they're really not going to save anything. Now, if they wait till after June 1st, the dead money is then only about $12 million. So it's not as big of a hit. Devontae Smith's contract is actually pretty manageable as well. And again, a lot of times whenever they do these two, kind of the benefit is you can you can actually push that more into like incentives and bonuses and whatnot. So again, you kind of kick the can a little bit farther on down the road. You don't have to worry as much on being able to have to deal with that. Now, again, some of the interesting though is a lot of these guys again are up for either going to retire or they're up for free agency. And at least on Philly's side, you've got Brandon Graham is potentially open. Mekhi Becton, the big guard that they got from New York in free agency, he is completely available. Even if they cut him post June 1st, it's only about $1 million. If they cut him before, it's about $3 million in dead money. So they'll probably wait till after, or they may re-sign him, to be 100% honest with you, depending on again if Lane Johnson decides to go anywhere, if they're able to financially afford that. Zach Bond is going to potentially be a free agent. Another big one that, did a lot for them as far as being on that defensive side of the ball. Darian Kennard, another tackle, if I remember correctly. He's not going to do a big cut against him if they decide to, move on from him and whatnot. So they have some key players that they need, but they have a little bit of flexibility and whatnot in being able to move some of that money around, being able to work with it. So we'll have to see. Howie Roseman's been able to work his magic with absolutely no issues before. It's absolutely extremely frustrating to see. But same with Brett Veach in Kansas City side. He's able to make, a lot of magic work and whatnot. And again, for both of these teams, you kind of already know that when they're coming in, you're more than likely going to compete for a Super Bowl. And that's something I've said for a long time on the show. And again, it was so aggravating for so many years. Tom Brady mentioned that, and the Patriots mentioned that for a long time of, do you want to get paid top dollar or do you want to win a championship? And for some guys, they want to try to win both. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Obviously look at Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, both. While they're both paid very respectively and very handsomely, they're not necessarily number one getting paid in the position that they're in currently right now. And it shows because they had a ton of roster support behind them. And again, they're probably more than likely going to be able to get that continued roster support even post Super Bowl for both of these teams. So congrats to absolutely both of them. They did great. Again, not exactly happy that Nick Sirianni was able to win the championship, just because he likes to crap talk fans, and that annoys the snot out of me. You're like one of 32 head coaches that makes millions of dollars, dude. Why are you crap talking just the regular fan that comes to the game? Even your own Philadelphia Eagles fans, which is also insane to me just personally. But nonetheless, though, that's just something that kind of personally aggravated me. And I kind of wanted both teams to lose, but unfortunately that's not really not realistically possible nonetheless. But we are going to take a quick commercial break because it's about a little bit of halftime show. We'll be maybe a little bit short today. We're going to listen to Joe Muse, Dead Man Walking, for the commercial break song. And when we come back, we'll talk about Kellen Moore getting hired as the Saints head coach, which is semi-breaking news, semi-not, because we already knew that was going to happen long before the Super Bowl. They already kind of announced that was going to be the case. They just didn't want to. They want to make sure all their ducks in a row. They want to make sure that they didn't have any type of tampering and whatnot, and made sure they did everything correctly. But all the reports were, and obviously as they were confirmed, barring anything crazy happening or barring Philly making a last minute like super high ditch effort offer, they were going to more than likely hand him the reins in New Orleans. So when we come back on the other side of the show, we will break it all down when we come back.
Hombre muerto.
Dead man. 10 years hard time for something that I didn't do. You've been living on easy street. Now that's just coming to you. You're a dead man. You're a dead man walking.
All right, we are back to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, helping teach veterans how to podcast, and most importantly, letting veterans' voices be heard. Appreciate that. Shout out, Terry. Very much appreciate that. If you also want another great podcast with Terry, she interviews a ton of great people as far as small businesses go. She interviewed a gentleman who is a law enforcement officer out of New York who has his own side business, and I'm pretty sure she and I both agree he never sleeps. Like most of us veterans, law enforcement, public service, and whatnot, we don't really know what sleep is. Sleep is just for the weak. Also a great podcast, so definitely check Terry out. Same with Into the Weeds with Amber and her daughter Laura. Both of them are really good. They talk about literally anything and everything. There's been a few different cases and shows and whatnot that they kind of dive into they're absolutely fantastic. And you talk about a super fun YouTube comment group. They are always popping. They have like 50 to 100 plus people in there all the time going absolutely nuts. So they are a great group of ladies with a fantastic show and whatnot. So definitely check out both Into the Weeds and Terry's show as well. All absolutely fantastic. So we are back to talk a little bit about so far, the very last coaching hire for the teams that needed a head coach coming into 2025. And like I said, for anybody who really dives into sports, especially pre-Super Bowl, there was already a lot of rumors and mentions that Kellen Moore was going to be the new head coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. They did have to be a little bit careful because technically they were not allowed to interview him. I think they could still talk to him and whatnot, but for the most part, they weren't allowed to do any type of formal interviews with Kellen to be able to actually confirm that he was going to be the guy, just purely because of tampering. But after the Super Bowl was finished, they were officially allowed to start doing interviews and whatnot. And according to all reports, basically, as long as nothing crazy happened, he was for sure going to be the guy down in the Bayou there in Louisiana. So now he's officially the head coach of the Saints. And for Joy, who I know followed me on YouTube from Into the Weeds podcast, by the way, I know she might be a little bit upset about this because she is a Saints fan. But Kellen Moore has his work cut out for him down there in New Orleans. And I say that because of their overall cap situation. Their cap has been bad for years, and it has continuously been bad. A lot of players as far as retiring and leaving, Michael Thomas, Drew Brees, and whatnot. Them trying to do right by those players that have helped the organization for so long, and just overall kind of bad management for New Orleans part. Right now, they are over $60 million over the salary cap. And for anybody who doesn't know how the salary cap works, you have a maximum of $275 million that you can spend throughout the season. And that even sometimes rolls over from the previous season. Now, each year it tends to go up. I think next year the projected cap is almost $295 million. And then after that, in 2027, it's projected to be cap maximum of almost $315 million. So it does go up each and every year. But as it stands right now, the Saints are over $60 million over the cap. So they're going to have to do a ton of restructuring. They're going to potentially have to cut a lot of good players that they do have. And for New Orleans, too, they're going to have to very heavily rely on the draft as a whole in order to be successful. Now, a little bit of his benefit is he does have a top 10 pick. The Saints are currently sitting at number 9 as far as the draft goes. I'm going to look and see what other draft picks they have here off of ESPN. And I don't think it has all of their picks listed. It doesn't. That's kind of annoying. Nonetheless, though, yeah, it doesn't have all of them yet, but he has a top 10 pick, so he does have something to work with. Now, obviously, one of the big questions down there in New Orleans is what do they do as far as quarterback situation goes? They have Derek Carr, who's an established veteran. Now, he's kind of on and off the field just due to injuries last year. He ended up not being able to finish the season due to an injury. But Spencer Rattler, I felt like came in and did pretty serviceable, all things considering as far as what they have down there. They do have Chris Olave down there. If I remember correctly, they do still have Alvin Kamara. But a big question mark is that offensive line. I have still not heard anything as far as Ryan Ramczyk goes. I know the last I had heard, his career was potentially in jeopardy just because of a career-ending injury and whatnot. So he has a lot that he has to deal with down there in New Orleans. And I'm going to try to look at their roster as well as far as who New Orleans has. So they have Derek Carter's 34. Cam Jordan is also still there. He's 36. He's probably one of the oldest players on contract down there. They have Taysom Hill is 35. Ryan Remchak, like I said, is 31. His career might be potentially finished. Demario Davis is sitting down there at 36. Now they do have Chase Young on the other side, so they could potentially still have a guy. Now I know they signed him last season, but I don't know if they signed him for more than a 1-year contract or not. They have Foster Moreau, who came over from the Raiders. He had a little bit of a health scare for a little bit there as far as having to deal with, I believe, a battle of cancer, but I could be 1,000% wrong on that. I know he had some type of an actual pretty hurtful disease that he was able to overcome and able to come back to football with. They do have Tyrann Mathieu, who again is also getting older. They do have Kool-Aid McKinstry, the cornerback out of Alabama that they drafted in the last year's draft. Didn't do anything as far as crazy, making a huge standout, but it is a potential young piece there that they really could work with as far as having a core young talented group. As well as there's one other one that I saw. They do have Cedric Wilson, who he's also kind of coming to the end of his career. He's about 30 and has kind of been bouncing around here of lately. Where is that other? Oh, Rashid Shaheed. Another pretty actually decent wide receiver that's been able to step in and kind of complement Chris Olave, at least on the other side, for New Orleans. So there is positives to work with. The other question, though, is who is he going to bring with him as far as his coaching staff goes? And that's kind of the bad part with being on a Super Bowl staff and going to and being last as far as the head coaching carousel goes is, now he's going to have to try to poach coaches from Philly. Maybe some offensive line coaches, maybe some defensive back coaches, defensive line and whatnot. He's going to have to try to poach them in order to get them to come with him to hopefully build a successful staff. Now, I do think for Kellen, and if I'm New Orleans, if you truly want him to succeed, you're going to have to give him a lot of time in order to rebuild. You're going to have to give him time to rebuild. You're going to have to give him time to draft. Not necessarily a culture, because I think New Orleans still actually has a pretty decent culture. You look at how New Orleans has done, they've almost always been competitive. They almost always have a pretty decent defense. Offensively, for the last few years is really where New Orleans has struggled, and they've struggled ever since they lost Drew Brees. I think for New Orleans, the biggest thing that they truly need to find is a franchise quarterback. Now, again, at least sitting at 9, looking at for everything for face value, I don't know if you're necessarily going to have that guy there at 9, and I've kind of broken it down before as far as teams in those picks. So, and I can do it real quick here. At least just the top 10 anyway. So if we look at the teams who need quarterbacks in the top 10, Tennessee needs a quarterback, Cleveland needs a quarterback, New York needs a quarterback, Patriots, Jags are good, the Raiders need a quarterback, the Jets need a quarterback. Jury's still out if the Panthers are going to potentially take a quarterback, if they're going to try to stick with Bryce Young or not. And then you have New Orleans. So you've at minimum got 6 teams ahead of you that need a quarterback, and there's really not 6 first-round talent caliber quarterbacks in this draft. I think Cam Ward could potentially be one. There's a lot of questions, at least to me, and I know they even brought it up as far as the even on the college side, he's kind of lackadaisical. He's very laissez-faire, very hands-off type of quarterback and type of style, which isn't bad. However, it does lead to a lot of questions as to, was that a potential cost to some of the Miami games they lost? Because they were a hot team, but a lot of teams were able to come back on them, and they would come really close to losing and they would squeak it out. But again, there was a lot of really close calls there in Miami that if Cam Ward had a little bit more intensity, would those results have been a little bit different? And could we have potentially seen the Hurricanes in a college football playoff game? Who knows? Same with Shedeur. I don't have anything against Shedeur. Again, I've made the argument that I think he went as far as Travis Hunter carried him. I mean, Travis Hunter again, while he's not the number one wide receiver in the draft, to me personally, I think he was a pretty good wide receiver and pretty good defensive back, but I don't think he was elite in either position, to be 1,000% honest with you. And I think honestly for Shedeur, he got carried by as far as he would, as far as Shedeur, as far as Travis Hunter would basically carry him. So there's a little bit of questions there as far as Shedeur goes. I know Quinn Ewers may potentially enter the draft. I think he still has time to pull back on that decision should he decide to, but I don't necessarily see him doing that unless he tries to go back to Ohio State and compete for a national title. But again, who knows? That's purely speculation, because last time I said anything about speculation in Ohio State fans, they got super mad at me. Chill. Speculation. So, and really after that, I mean, there are probably quarterbacks out there. Not saying that you have to get a guy number one overall for you to pan out. We've seen, Russell Wilson fell to the third round, ended up being a pretty decent quarterback. Same with Kirk Cousins. Obviously, the whole Tom Brady story. He fell to pick 199, turned out to be a great quarterback. Another quarterback that we'll probably see, at least NFL-wise, how he does since the 49ers gave him the opportunity to be traded, Deebo Samuel. How does Brock Purdy manage as far as being a quarterback goes now that he's going to start losing some of those pieces that San Francisco had to try to, win and build a Super Bowl team and whatnot. So nonetheless, this upcoming offseason and whatnot will be extremely interesting for both the NFL, for college, for absolutely all of them. I'm 100% excited to see how the next few months go. But like I said, we are going to end a little bit early tonight. Just because there's only so much I can talk about the Super Bowl, and I don't necessarily want to give bad content and whatnot, just because I run out of stuff to talk about. Should be back next week. We'll probably talk a little bit of college basketball, hopefully both the men's side and maybe a little bit of the women's side. We'll see. Maybe I'll even see if I could potentially get a guest to come on with me, and maybe that way you don't have to just hear me talk the entire time. But nonetheless, absolutely appreciate everybody tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, anything and everything that you have to do or want to do. As far as myself, everything is at Inside the Hoosier Mind. And if you like everything military broadcast radio wise, as far as all the other shows that I mentioned with Terry, as far as her show Tracer Round, same with Into the Weeds with Amber and Laura. Also really fantastic. If you want to hear great cases, they dive super deep into them. They have really good deep conversations about it and whatnot. They post up hilarious TikTok videos and kind of dissect them as well. Definitely check them out at Into the Weeds. But you can check out all those shows and my own on MB Radio, all up here, Roku, Fire TV, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all at MB Radio, Military Broadcast Radio. And again, you can learn more about veterans, potentially helping veterans, and kind of see their journey as far as what we learn to do as far as podcasting, helping some of their stories be heard. And a lot of veterans have a lot of knowledge that they want to share, because for some of us, we kind of like to teach, we like to educate, and we want to help set someone else up to succeed, where either we've succeeded in the past or where we think we would have succeeded had we done something a little bit differently, looking at it post-wise. But appreciate everybody tuning in and listening, and we will be back next week.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.